What if schizophrenia didn't have to be a life sentence or even a life-altering diagnosis? What if we could stop it before it starts? Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. I'm your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong. In this episode, we're joined by Dr. Leonard Lado, board-certified psychiatrist, researcher, and medical director of the Lado Healing Institute, for a conversation that might change the future of mental health. Dr. Lado shares his groundbreaking unified model of schizophrenia, a framework that weaves together genetics, brain circuitry, inflammation, and neurodevelopment to not only explain the disease, but to identify early interventions that could prevent it entirely. We also explore how this same model may apply to neurodegenerative conditions like dementia, and how tools like transcranial magnetic stimulation are opening a new frontier in preventative brain health. It's a deeply personal, deeply scientific conversation about psychiatry, neuroplasticity, and what it means to protect the brain before it breaks and prevents us from aging well.
The Aging Well podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical or mental health advice. Dr. Armstrong is a PhD exercise physiologist, and no doctor-patient relationship is suggested. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have, and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.
Well, Dr. Lado, welcome to the Aging Well podcast. You describe your work as both personal and scientific. Could you share the journey that led you to develop this unified model of schizophrenia?
Well, my journey is personal. At the age of 15, while I was doing surgery, my youngest son, who was about maybe 12 years old, started developing behaviors which I could understand. I couldn't make the connection as a surgery resident. However, as time went by, during that period, I had to make a decision due to financial reasons. I had to provide support for my son. I was divorced, and I couldn't moonlight. So I had to go to a residency that would let me. And the residency that would let me do that is psychiatry. Sometimes God has funny ways to show you some path, and you don't see it at this moment. You don't see it then, but you see it later in life. And during that process, I noticed his decline and the frustration behind that. To make a long story short, my son has been hospitalized 15 to 20 times. And I kept asking myself, what's happened to my profession? Why is it that he keeps getting hospitalized? What is it that we don't have? And I noticed that, at least in my profession, at least in his case, he was declining. He was basically suffering from schizophrenia. And when you get that label for schizophrenia, it's almost, you believe that it's irreparable, it's over. And that's not true. Being a psychiatrist, I have treated people with schizophrenia, and they have marriages, they have wives, they have children. The problem is that the disease itself causes these irrealities to make you stop taking medications. And that's a whole different pathway. Schizophrenia is a disease that once it reaches its peak becomes very challenging to treat. But interesting, a very beautiful drug came out many years ago called clozapine. And this is probably the only drug that seems to provide hope. It's an old drug. It was first put to a challenge that you couldn't prescribe it because it lowered your white cells. But recently, just this year alone, the FDA took the warnings, and you're allowed to prescribe it without doing blood work. It is given in Europe for years, but pharmaceuticals kept developing new receptors, and I can go down as to the history how this has evolved. So schizophrenia basically is a disease that it is really, if you catch it early, in my proposal that I'm about to publish, hopefully it'll be accepted publication, that the disease can be detected incredibly early, and that understanding certain chemicals that gives you warnings, you can slow down the disease and intervene early. And this journey to this theory was the result of my own also personal journey. 12 years ago, my own obesity. Here I was as a doctor taking care of people. And one day I woke up and I looked at myself. I'm never going to see my grandchildren. I am living the rat race of making money, taking care of patients, and I'm not an example for my patients. How can I be? I mean, I have to tell you, and you have to admit, you see doctors prescribing, and they're telling you to be in good health. They're not in the best shape, you know. So I couldn't live that image that can practice what you preach. So I made a journey of health, exercise, and eventually nutrition. And then from that journey, I began to ask myself, why this country so advanced, right? Do we still have diseases that we cannot take care of? What is it about our diet, our life? What is it we have done, right? And there are some diseases that could be explained better. But I was particularly interested in three diseases. One was schizophrenia. The other was Alzheimer's. The reason I took an interest in Alzheimer's, because when I was, while practicing psychiatry, I used to go to nursing homes to take care of the behavioral aspects of people with dementia. And they have all these behavioral problems that are very difficult. Once the disease reaches its peak, you see these behavioral problems. At that time, we didn't have a lot of tools to make good diagnoses. Now we do. Now we can diagnose it. We can actually detect it, but it doesn't help us how we treat it. So it's basically a moot point to already have developed these markers. But I do believe that these markers and these tests, if done early in life, you can intervene. And this is a very radical thing I'm about to tell you. And any radical idea poses a threat, because anything that's preventable, right, doesn't mean it is interpreted as not financially viable. It's not true. Prevention can generate profits for industry while providing a quality of life for humanity. It's just that the word of prevention means, well, we don't have the way, as you know, the way we treat disease now is basically we treat the problem everywhere, across the board. We provide new medications with better side effects, less side effects, just to maintain you alive, to keep you going, to minimize the symptom. In the case with schizophrenia, is to get rid of your delusions. In the case of Alzheimer's, to slow down the disease. So one of the things I learned in this journey, I began to learn this term about the blue zones, right? I was very skeptic about nutrition. We don't get taught, I didn't get taught at least, in medical school about nutrition. We didn't get a lot of that. My training, and I'll give you a little bit of my training. I was first a pharmacist. I have a little background as to where I'm coming from. I was first a pharmacist, and there I learned a great deal about pharmaceuticals and vitamins. During that time, I was invited to do research as a college student, which was an incredible privilege. I got to go to the NIH. I was invited as one of the few scholars. I even met Dr. Gallo. I don't know if he's alive, the guy who was behind and knowledge of the HIV. So I got to meet the politics behind research. And that also opened up my investigative mind in that I questioned everything. And I became like a detective. In fact, even in my relationships, people tell me that I have to know everything. And, and it's in my nature. I have to understand everything around me. So from there, I decided to go medical school. And this is important to this journey in schizophrenia because during that time, it was extremely competitive to get into an American medical school. Horrible. I mean, you had to be either very well affiliated. My father was poor and school was very expensive. So I had to make that choice of some of us made to go to another country. And believe it or not, I was lucky enough to go to a school in Mexico, in Tampico. Medicine there is totally different. It is not in congruence to what we teach here. I had to bring 2 textbooks, one to pass the exams in the American way and learn their medical school system. But what I learned in there was no instruments. I learned that observation and listening and history gave more data than any instrument. Diseases tell you stories. They tell you, here I am. Nature is a detective. It eggs you on. Nature and diseases don't destroy you. They bring you down. So you have to be a detective to listen to what your body is saying. And there I learned a great deal. My interest in surgery, I got accepted to the Baylor College of Medicine. I trained under Dr. DeBakey. For those who know who Dr. DeBakey is, he was the father of heart surgery. He invented heart surgery. I felt kind of meek because most of my peers came from Harvard and they came from Johns Hopkins. And I guess they felt that I was good enough to be there after completing my last year at Mount Sinai. And basically, it was a great program. I learned about and respect the art of surgery. Unfortunately, I had to provide support for my son, and I could not work outside. So I had to move to another profession, which I felt psychiatry. There I learned a great deal. There I learned about compassion, listening. Unfortunately, I went from this pedestal to this footstep. If you know surgery, you're like God. You heal, you cure, you save lives. In psychiatry, we were like at the bottom of the pedestal. Here, you get the people that are always sick, they're complaining, they're hopeless, helpless. It was a big fall, right? It was such a fall that I said, you know what? If I'm going to be a psychiatrist, I need to understand my own craziness. So I decided to do psychoanalysis. I invested in it because I said to myself, how could I understand crazy if I don't know my own crazy? I have my own crazy life. So I did, and it was a good journey. And even then, I couldn't help my son. He received electroconvulsive therapy. They couldn't figure out how to cure. He was aggressive. Eventually, a combination of meds were found, but again, it would decline. The last set of medication was clozapine and this. So this journey of what happened to me and all this background, I started asking myself, has schizophrenia been like this always? And it seems to be very prevalent, extremely prevalent in industrialized nations. You don't see a lot of schizophrenia in the places where they call the blue zones. There's something about the environment and genetics that they interact. And there's something called phenotypic activation, right? We're learning, and there are many good authors that can talk about this. If you're given a label, you're going to have, you can have the cancer gene, right? Or you can have the schizophrenia gene. Why do some people get cancer and they have the gene and you don't? You see? So what is it about our genetics and the environment that something gets activated? What activates? And they're already, and I'm trying to be as scientific and as layman as I can to your audience. But there are processes that are now confirmed that gene activation can be caused by environmental and even emotional, right? We do know that stress lowers your immune system, which activates a cascade of pathways that produces radicals. You heard the term radical? Mm-hmm. And these radicals can activate genes. So what is it about our society and schizophrenia and degenerative diseases that they're so prevalent? So there must be something that we do, right? Here's an example. We work so hard to save money. We chase the buck. How many stories have you heard that people 2 years into retirement, they die? Many of those horrible and sad stories. What did it take that person to work so hard? Why don't we have longevity? Why do we have these diseases? So I believe that something called oxidative stress has a lot to do with it. It is the premise of my paper that I'm waiting approval in Germany. And there I explain how Alzheimer's can be easily detected early and how we can intervene in steps and even develop molecules to halt the process. I think you would agree that stress is very damaging. We're not designed, humans are not designed for competing demands. We're constantly in a state of fight and flight. And you see what it does to us. We do know that constant stress can provoke vascular problems like hypertension. It can lower your immune system. It can phenotypically activate certain genes to cause diseases, right? So I realized that there was a connection also between this Alzheimer's and schizophrenia. In fact, yesterday my paper, it's a long, and I said there must be something that we have done in our water, in our diets, in our life, that these diseases are very prevalent. And that's the whole thing that you picked up from Nicholas. I talked about the different models of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia has many different explanations. One of the things I'm proposing, a unified model. It's a breakdown of the brain's defense system. All organs have a defense system against illnesses. Schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, is a breakdown of your brain's defense. I don't know if I gave you any opportunity to ask questions. I don't know if I gave you, like I said, this is what happens when your brain is like,
that's okay.
Constantly thinking about ideas.
If you're enjoying the Aging Well podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your favorite platform so you will never miss an episode. And if you find our conversations helpful, please share the podcast with a friend, because aging is something we're all doing, and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below, and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. Thank you, and now back to the podcast. Well, let's kind of backtrack a little bit. You've identified 6 major models of schizophrenia, and I believe that's dopamine, neurodevelopmental, neurodegenerative, circuit dysfunction, glutamate, and immune. And you've talked a little bit about immune. Why do you believe none of these tells the full story?
Because they're bits and pieces, right? They're all, they explain, if you have an engine, right? An engine has multiple parts. You're just fixing one part of the engine, right? But the other part is going to damage. The brain is an electrical circuit. It's electricity, water, and chemicals. And in order for the brain to function, you have to have something called homeostasis, which you've probably heard of the term, right? It is a balance of certain things to keep tissue functioning. When one part of the tissue, for example, in the case for the dopamine system in a certain part of the brain, the caudate nuclei, right, becomes impaired and imbalanced, you develop symptoms. But that's only one part of a circuit. So if you try to visualize the whole, everything is interconnected. You know, there's not one. The way we studied is, well, if we fix the dopamine system, yeah, we're going to fix the symptoms that predominate in the dopamine system, but you still have the disease, right? And then how do you get to that dopamine system? Well, there are many different pathways. There are new pathways. There are new drugs now. The glutamergic pathway, which is another transmitter, is another way to enter that system. So they're all interconnected, but they don't explain the cause. And I believe that, and again, you have to forgive me. I want to say so much, but until I publish this, I cannot disclose too much. But there is an interconnection between these pathways that could be explained in terms of disease. Now, it's a theory. This could be knocked down by my peers. They can say it's wrong. You're totally wrong, Dr. Lado. But that's what I want them to see. I need to challenge them. I need to ask them to see this theory, to see if explained. But all these circuits have a certain connection. I can tell you this: they're all impacted by oxidative stress. So we've tried to find explanations to this disease to find new cures. Right? We have new drugs that have come out with different parts of the brain. The old ones, as you know, thorazine and clozapine, and out there newer drugs, Invega, and all these other drugs, they act in different parts of the brain to alleviate the symptoms. But once you start treating the symptoms, and what I'm trying to propose here, that I believe that brain disease, for example, could be detected early. We have figured out now, we now have serum tests. We now have serum tests that we can detect amyloid in the serum to determine the risk for Alzheimer's. There's a certain ratio of 2 types of amyloids that you can do a blood test, right? And if those ratios are abnormal, you can do a PET scan to see if you have high risk. So it gives the human being a better chance to face the disease or even slow it down through newer drugs, immunoglobulins, and everything else. I believe it's the same with schizophrenia. So what I'm trying to propose here is to detect these early markers where the brain had become dysfunction and intervene early. But they're all interconnected. They have just different, these are just damages, they're different parts of a circuit that cause the disease. Those are the models. But they have a similar connection. I do believe, and I guess this has been spoken about, there are certain essential nutrients that are necessary. Lithium is in the water system. It was removed in the 1950s. And I think there might be a connection there, and I'm able to prove that. I believe you remember the sailors with scurvy? Mm-hmm. They took oranges and they resolved it, right? I believe that there are certain nutrients and certain compounds that can intervene early to slow down the disease. But you have to prove it. That means you have to put the theory to a test. The problem with these theories, they're very expensive. It requires longitudinal studies in which, unless there's a new compound, no pharmaceutical company will make an investment in it. Unless the compound that you're about to develop is very similar to the thing that causes prevention, right? Which I believe is a good idea, because already you're thinking ahead of the game. Well, if we can detect that this is the cause, okay, we'll develop a compound to slow the process. And I say, good for you. If you can detect the disease early, I'm for detecting it early, and slowing down the progression. As you know, this is a progressive disease, right? It gets worse. It gets shrinkage. There are all kinds of imbalances, neurochemical imbalances. There are all kinds of brain tissue degeneration. There are PET findings and MRI findings. So yes, I hope that answered the question that you wanted to know.
Absolutely. And I got more. So you've mentioned that schizophrenia can begin as early as in utero. What does this mean for prevention, and how might maternal health and early life care factor into this?
Right. And I don't know so much in utero. There are some people in Mount Sinai who did some studies with fetal tissue, not fetal tissue, with tissue that they did studies on embryonic development. I have yet to see that it develops in utero. Okay, I don't see that. I haven't seen that. There is a model in Mount Sinai that explains the theory in terms of degeneration through certain stem cells, right? I believe that it is genetic. There is a genetic component, that there is a certain gene that seems to be associated with it. But I do believe that this gene gets activated. So the question is, if you have the gene, what causes activation? So what are the things that you see people with schizophrenia, right? They're associated with poverty. They're associated with trauma. You've probably heard of people that they seen something traumatic and they lost it. They were never the same. I can tell you with 100% confidence that schizophrenia, and I know that this is not going to, that your West Coast people are not going to like this, marijuana in male adolescents, I have seen more psychosis and schizophrenia than ever. We knew this back in the 1990s. And I don't want to upset the marijuana industry, but I have to tell you, facts are facts. There seems to be an association of early use of marijuana and the formation of psychosis years later. And you probably heard people who have hyperemesis syndrome from excess marijuana. My concern is that this was a product that was highly promoted even by my profession. The truth is, without making anybody angry, is that marijuana is a great thing for cancer, vomiting, glaucoma, and certain epilepsy. But they haven't done enough research to say which dose helps anxiety. There's no clinical trials. It's just empirical data. Another thing that worries me is this LSD movement. You've probably seen, right? There's now this new movement of using LSD and psychogenic compounds for the treatment of psychiatric conditions. Now, I'm going to be hated by pharmaceuticals. I'm going to be blacklisted on this. They have a lot of research, supposedly, to back it up, but it comes with a risk. I remember, again, during my training, those mushrooms and that LSD made everybody psychotic. I guess they must modify the molecule. So I think that you're born with a gene, and your environment, including certain drugs, certain stressors, seems to activate a cascade of damage that is very subtle. And you probably will hear that there are two waves, usually by the age of 20, 23, or the mid 30s. That's when you see the peak of the disease, right? You don't see it as often as you grow older. So there seems to be something between the ages of 18 and 30 where the disease is more prominent. So I believe that chromosomes is one, and phenotypic activation through a process of oxidative stress is the other.
So do you think the brain doesn't really fully develop until at least about the age of 25?
No, that's not true. No, the brain already develops. I don't know. The brain already is developed at the age of 25. It depends how you define development. How do you define development? I mean, the brain is fully developed. Usually there are certain pathways that develop as you grow with age. It's already developed at the age of 25.
Well, I don't mean like from an anatomical standpoint, but more from a neurological standpoint that, that's been the understanding I've heard from other physicians and stuff. And that's one of the main reasons why they tend to argue against early use of marijuana and, other drugs like that.
I think early use as early as teenage. The studies have shown teenage, not 20s, not the 20s. We're talking about 16 and 15-year-olds. Early use at the age of 15, you start seeing excessive use. It carries a high risk for developing psychosis by the time they reach 20. Nothing to do with 20. The use that they use is very early. That's what we're seeing. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I guess so. And so what about like epigenetics? you've mentioned kind of a genetic connection to it and the interactions with the environment. Do you think there's potential epigenetic effects?
Well, we know already that certain chemicals, there are certain chemicals which we already identify, which are toxic, can develop Alzheimer's. So we get rid of them. Agent Orange. There's high suspicion, aluminum. Right? It's very controversial, but aluminum, there's good sound studies to substantiate that it's been associated with Alzheimer's. There are certain metals, and in fact, I think I mentioned that in my paper. I mentioned in my paper that I'm waiting to be published, that certain metals can activate. Environment has a lot to do with it. I think that, but the most important thing, compounds in certain situations activate a series of chemical reaction that lead to radicals, right? And these radicals interact with genes and seem to activate them. A great example, right? Premature aging, right? I mean, it doesn't take a lot of science to see somebody who's athletic, right? And I mean, look at your cohorts, the ones that don't exercise, they seem to age faster. So what is it about exercise? What is it about exercise that seems to, I am 66 years old, by the way. What is it about exercise that it seems to shorten the telomeres? There's something about the environment that you can control genetic to some extent, if you alter your environment in a beneficial way, we know this already, right? You reduce heart disease, you reduce diabetes. I mean, we know this already, and exercise seems to reverse some of these things. So if this simple, can you explain the placebo effect? Which I can. What is the placebo effect? Why do you tell somebody? Why do we have to have placebo? We have to have placebo effect, which is a whole other topic. 30% of people will respond to treatment with sugar. So this is why we have double-blinded studies controlled. So what is it about the placebo effect? Nobody bothers studying that. What does the placebo effect activate in your brain? Aren't you curious? I am. What is it about you telling somebody what chemicals on the brain is activated during the placebo? Nobody bothers studying that. It's not profitable. It's not something you can benefit from. There's no economic gain from this.
So there are no studies on the placebo effect?
No, there's a lot of good authors on it, but I don't know. I have yet to see. I'm not so acquainted with it, but I'd like to see some neurochemical releases. I have to really dive into that. That is not my pathway right now, but it'd be something I'd be curious to find out. But I already have enough on my plate.
Yeah, I've never I've accepted it because I've seen it, and I just, when I've designed studies, it's, you have to take into account a placebo effect, and so you test against a placebo, but never ask the question why.
I hope that answers that question.
Yeah. So let's kind of get into some of the nuts and bolts of studying the intervention and so on. Transcranial Magnetic Stimulation, or TMS, plays a very critical role in your research. So for listeners that aren't familiar, how does TMS work and why is it so promising for early stage intervention?
Okay, let me tell you, this is a whole new technology. It's a beautiful technology. It's magnetic. It's magnetic energy. What is it about magnetic energy to the brain that can alter mood, right? This is not new. Let me tell you where this began. I was there when the Harvard first came out, and I remember the original pioneers back in I think it was 1995 or 96. I have the first thing where I was invited to Harvard. Many of us were there. We were like freaking out. So how do you impact the brain? Before it was electricity, electroconvulsive therapy. So what electricity does is you apply a magnetic current, right? And in doing so, it's like a jolt, right? It's a jolt of energy that basically wakes up for a brief second the neurons. And they did find that applying electricity I think one flew over the cuckoo's nest really overdid it. It was, I think that there was a movement to discredit that treatment and maybe it woke up psychiatrists to do it better. But the premise behind electroconvulsive therapy is that you have people who don't respond to medications. They're so profoundly depressed or manic that they're just not functioning. And by applying 12 sessions of it, they seem to improve. I did do ECT when I was in Indiana, and I saw great results. The only drawback is that it had a very people who did, no matter how cautious you did it, people had some short-term memory loss. And the memory loss was related to the bad events, not the good event. Interesting enough, ECT did not get rid of your good thoughts, it got rid of the bad ones. And that I could never explain. So back in the 90s, this technology of using magnets was already used by surgeons. So when they used to do neurosurgery, they used to apply this magnetic field in the brain from here to the feet because they saw that magnetic energy or this magnet. I don't even know how many Teslas it was. I think maybe 1 Tesla or less. I don't think they had the technology to have 1 Tesla. And notice that the people would repair quickly. So there was a gentleman in England, which my name doesn't come to mind, but he proposed that applying a magnetic field, if the brain is a circuit and you apply a magnetic field, if you take a magnet and you spin it around a coil and you spin the magnet in a coil, what happens? You get electricity, right? So you're applying a magnetic field to coils, allowing neurons to move. So what we learn is that by applying a magnetic field in a certain part of your brain, it does many effects. It has many positive effects. It causes neuroplasticity, generation. Apparently, the brain cells seem to realign. There's increased synaptic transmission. There seems to be an improvement of mood. It has already been approved for 3 or 4 conditions. It's approved now for addictions. It is approved now for depression. It is approved for OCD, but it has not been tested yet for schizophrenia. So the premise is that if you apply a magnetic field around neural tissue, that can actually improve your neuroplasticity and may or may not alter the neurotransmitters. The problem with this kind of research, there's been maybe 7 or 8 trials or more on schizophrenia, but the results have been mixed. But I think that TMS may play a very important role. In fact, I think I have it here. There was one study. Where they actually saw improvement of certain symptoms, but it wasn't sustained. And I think this is a future technology. You're starting to see this transcranial magnetic stimulation. There are other devices very similar to that. They're using now similar devices for migraine headaches. So maybe another way to the brain is by using magnetic fields. The problem is getting the right frequency, the right location, and that's going to require a lot of research. And there is a lot of research. The Society of Transcranial Magnetic, the TMS Society, has a lot of good articles and research. And they also train psychiatrists to do these kind of treatments. And I hope that answers that.
Yeah. So do you see this as a symptom management tool or as a true disease modifying therapy?
I think it at this point, modify. I may modify, but more research is going to be needed for schizophrenia. We do know that with depression, people who fail medications, by keeping the medicine, you get an 85% success rate. There are many types of devices that you can use, right? That 50% fail rate, we're still trying to figure out why. But I can tell you, and it's usually sustained. Some people is sustained for a year, and some is sustained maybe for 6 months. So insurance company will permit a retreatment every 90 days. I've had very good successes. I have patients, older patients, who basically were really in bad shape, anxious. They've been through a series of medications. They couldn't function. They were depressed, and they've been hospitalized multiple times in the retirement years. And we were able to apply this treatment, and they've done great. They're now traveling, and there are good success stories out there.
So with dementia and Alzheimer's, what are some of the overlapping mechanisms with schizophrenia that we should be paying attention to?
Generation. It's always some form of. In the case of dementia, we know that certain tangles. There are many types of dementia. We know that certain tangles, tau and tau protein, and the amyloids, alpha beta amyloids, seem to be associated with it. But they seem to be associated of degeneration. There is a shrinkage, there is a damage, there is a impairment, and that's how they're connected. And they're also connected because they're slow diseases, right? They're not fast, which is very interesting. There are certain viral diseases called slow brain. It's called slow virus diseases that does that kind of problem to your brain. There are certain what we call mad cow disease, right? Very similar. There's something about some viruses. In fact, there are some viruses that seem to cause degeneration of the brain. So the commonness between these diseases is neurodegeneration.
So what would early detection and prevention look like for diseases like Alzheimer's and schizophrenia?
I think if we are able to detect the products, I think that the brain at the early stages sends out biomarkers. There are many kinds of biomarkers saying it's sick. The alpha beta, the amyloids, the beta amyloids are one of the markers. There are certain byproducts of oxidative stress, certain proteins that could be detected earlier, but it's very expensive. So let's say you're able to detect the disease early. If these are degenerative diseases, and forgive me if I'm trying to be as layman as I can without giving too many, because I don't know what kind of audience you have, but I'm going to make it as simplistic as possible. If you have brain damage, the cells leaks out certain substances, and if there is activation of certain pathways like oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is associated with certain chemicals. If you can detect these chemicals early associated with the brain, you can intervene early. Let us say you have high oxidative stress, and oxidative stress, I'm not saying is the cause, it's a contributing cause. There are many things. There are certain pathways that activate these tangles, right? But what if you are able to show that oxidative stress is the cause and you can prove it? Or you can be challenged, it can be reviewed, right? What if you're intervener? Well, the simplest intervention, antioxidants. And there have been studies with molecules, antioxidant molecules. In my LinkedIn page, I describe some of those molecules. There's a section there about research on antioxidants in one of my posts there that talks about molecules that have been studied. The problem with antioxidants, they can cause different, if not the right compound, it can cause redox, what we call redox problem in chemical reactions, which is not beneficial. But if you can detect this early, you can intervene with a molecule, which is a powerful antioxidant, and slow down the disease. Because they're neurodegenerative. This is not from trauma. This is because something is pinging on these neurons. And in my article in the Alzheimer, oxidative stress plays a very central role. And if you can slow down that process, either through lifestyle intervention, molecular intervention, diet intervention, you have a winning chance. Do you have any stories when people, I'm sure in your experience, that they changed their diets, they changed their lifestyle, and they turned around? Have you seen those stories? I'm asking.
I haven't probably directly myself, but just interviewing a number of different guests, seeing kind of some of the same things. I do recall I interviewed, I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Lufkin. He wrote the book, The Lies I Taught in Medical School. And he related a story of one of his colleagues that works with schizophrenia patients. And he talks in regards to the benefits of the ketogenic diet in patients with schizophrenia, that he had his patients that if they stick to the keto diet, they're not hearing the voices. But as soon as they go off it, and they know that they're not in ketogenesis anymore, as they start hearing the voices again. I'm not familiar with, a lot of literature on all the different studies on that. And I know that's one particular intervention. And that's kind of one of the questions I was going to ask you is, what are some of these interventions and what are some of the specific antioxidants that you feel are most beneficial to treating schizophrenia and preventing?
That if I had the answer, I become the Nobel Prize. I don't have that. I believe that there's no antioxidant that's going to prevent schizophrenia. It would be a fool if I was to tell you that. But I do. I do recall back in the 1980s, Linus Pauling. Have you heard of him?
Mm-hmm.
So Linus Pauling, was one of the first people who basically wrote the possibility that niacin treatment, niacin treatments may slow down schizophrenia. He was pretty much a Nobel Prize winner because he developed the alpha helix. Not the alpha helix. He developed a protein model, which is an alpha helix. He termed the coin orthomolecular psychiatry. It was in 1968. So what he did, Pauling and his colleagues, he believed that schizophrenia was a metabolic disorder, and it had to do with an aberrant chain reaction of methylation. And basically, what he did, he didn't have large randomized control trials, so he couldn't replicate a lot of the studies. But he was one of the first ones that said that niacin is crucial for NAD plus synthesis, and that basically it was one of the first ones that he talked about neuroinflammation, oxidative stress, and nutrient genome interactions, just like I told you, right? He was one of the first. He didn't have the internet, so he couldn't so he had to go to these scientific meetings. I think there's are you in the state of Washington?
Oregon.
Oregon. There is a Linus Pauling Institute there, right? One of the universities. They still talk about this. So he's one of the first that talked about orthomolecular psychiatry, the impact. He realized that certain nutrients may have impacts in some diseases. There is no unified treatment. There is no unified, but there is I believe that there's a common pathway that can lead to these diseases. And basically, and if you can catch the pathway early, you can intervene early. But I can tell you that antioxidants are key, not the ones from Mother Nature. You need more powerful ones, right? And I did discuss some of them in my LinkedIn page.
So what are some of the ones? So when I think of, the more natural ones would be your glutathione, which the body produces and is considered kind of that master antioxidant. Vitamin C plays a pretty important role. What other antioxidants are we talking about here that we feel?
You have alpha lipoic acid. You have glutathione. Right? In fact, this is I think that the question is, I don't think that, like I said, it's, I'm not saying that taking these is going to stop the disease. I think that berry, I'm going to tell you something very simple. Berries are very rich in glutathione, are very rich, and you see some of these people promoting them. I think that your diet, your lifestyle and your diet makes an impact. It's not going to stop schizophrenia. It's much more complex than that. Schizophrenia, once it develops, it's already developing years early. I think it could be detected as early as 20 years old, or you can start seeing the chemicals. You can start seeing compounds that are floating around, the radicals. I think that they're viral, but this again has to be put to the test. This is all theory, right? And until you put the theory through your peers, it's meaningless. Mm-hmm. The best evidence is your peers, people in universities. I have done clinical trials. I was involved in many multiple trials back in 2005. So I know what clinical trials are involved and what they're about. I've been principal investigator. I was a principal investigator in one of the trials when the first drug for Aricept came out, danazepam. So I know the background of clinical trials. It's very rigorous. So what I'm trying to propose here is a theory, which I want to be challenged, not ridiculed, but challenged, even if it's a theory that seems to be implausible. You just open up a whole new world for somebody else to think. Ideas are like that. They bounce off each other. And let me tell you what AI is doing. AI is dumb, artificial intelligence, but it's being utilized in research, right? It's being utilized in research. Artificial intelligence is dumb. The only thing that makes it intelligent is the prompt. It's you. You instructed to make connections and validate your theory. I have used AI in some ways, but not always, to help me find articles, right? It's great in finding articles. It is being utilized and experimented in right now in the utilization for trials, clinical trials, and pharmaceutical. There's actually probably schools of this right now, how to use AI. What makes AI interesting is that you have an idea, a spark, and you put it to the test. Right? That's what you do. Now, it is known that AI can hallucinate, means it can give you false data. So whatever data it gives you, you have to validate manually. And basically, you literally have to look at the article, but at least it points you towards the article. So I think AI is going to be a wonderful thing in the future in elucidating this and many other diseases.
So hypothetically, what are the major lifestyle changes you would suggest may be linked to minimizing the risk of Alzheimer's and schizophrenia?
I believe you need to live a life of exercise at a very young age, discipline, with no expectation. I believe you need to have a balance. Just exercise 3 days a week. Pick something. I believe that the foods that you eat, I believe that the oils we eat can help us or harm us. I believe that the Mediterranean diet-like style foods will help. I believe that sugar is an enemy. I believe you can get sugar from simple things like berries and grapes, I think you probably notice when you're stressed, people want to eat. And the reason they want to eat, there is a pathway for that. Because when you eat sugar, you activate serotonin and dopamine. And sugar is the most potent dopamine stimulator. So when you're hungry, when you're stressed out, you have to eat. I believe your diet has an impact. I believe that you have to be educated at a very young age, at the high school level, and emphasize the importance of these lifestyles. It has to start very early in life, but it's never too late. I started at 50, right? And I believe that these simple interventions of exercise and certain diets can minimize risk of many, many diseases. And even if you get the disease, you have a better fighting chance. I'm not saying it's going to cure cancer. I'm not saying it's going to prevent degenerative diseases, but it minimizes your oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is the result of inflammation. Inflammation is your body's response yelling at you, I can't take this anymore. You heard of the term inflammation, right? Mm-hmm. It is your body is reacting to a foreign substance, right? Whether psychological, but inflammation and oxidative stress are the core of disease. In fact, I just came across, there was a job opening in one of the new pharmaceutical companies. It's called the Inflammatory Disease Department. Well, the first time I saw something, well, these people might be on the right path. Inflammation is a way of your body, it's reaching its peak limit.
So let's kind of shift gears to kind of the idea of neuroplasticity. How is our understanding of how the brain's adaptability is evolving, even kind of within a single neuron?
I think that we always believed years ago that after a certain age, your brain stops, right? We thought that. But we did not take into account the term neuroplasticity. Mm-hmm. Neuroplasticity, you have increased synaptic connections. Remember, if the organ, it's a way of an organ adapting. It's for example, if you're an athlete, right, that part of your brain is going to be highly developed. It has to do with neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity, I believe, is a mechanism of adaptation. And I believe it can be provoked through TMS, Transcranial Magnetic Stimulation. It can be provoked by emotional, by your emotional well-being. So neuroplasticity is a mechanism that's viable that you actually can see synapses reconnecting. It is what the brain has to heal itself and to adapt. There's still a lot of studies on neuroplasticity, but it is a beneficial thing that the brain has. And it also gives you hope. For example, when you get a stroke, right, by going through physical therapy, although you may not recuperate 100%, because of the process of neuroplasticity, it finds new pathways to adapt. It finds new ways to heal itself. If we can tap into that, and perhaps one day through stem cell technology, I don't know, they have talked about people with Parkinson's disease, they have implanted stem cells, right, with some improvement. If we can tap into that energy and that process of the brain, I think it's going to help us a great deal.
So what kind of reaction have you received from the psychiatric community? And what would you like to see changed in how we train doctors about schizophrenia?
Oh, that's a big loaded question, my friend. You just opened up a rabbit hole there. I think that healing is two-way. If the patient conceives that you have given up on them, they don't heal. You have to give patients hope that even though they have a very bad disease, in doing so, I believe you activate their own placebo effect. I believe faith in you and what you do. I think we need to train doctors in the emergency room. Just because you're psychiatric doesn't mean you have other issues. I have one of the biggest disappointments I've seen, because these illnesses are chronic. Just because you're labeled psychiatric, you're kind of put on the wayside. People homeless in the streets. Doctors don't deal in failure. That's denial for them. Right? We have to succeed. When you cannot cure a patient's problem, we unfortunately call the patient difficult, the difficult patient. And giving that label to that patient, you just took away their hope. I think we need to train them to listen, because even though you have psychiatric problems, you may have other diseases. You have no idea how many other diseases I've detected in my office. And thank God for my surgical training. I was able to detect certain cancers, certain spinal injuries, certain chronic developmental. And let me tell you the biggest thing that we're failing in right now, men with low T's, low testosterone. I had this guy, the testosterone level 13. Nobody bothered checking.
That was his total testosterone?
13.
Holy cow. I mean, that's where you want your free testosterone to be.
A young man. So I think that if I had to change, is that Do not give up on your patients. They will battle with you. They will battle with you if you battle with them. They know that they're sick and they feel like it's hopeless, but you always got to give them a new pathway of hope. And I can tell you true stories. I had a man who had lung cancer and he was psychiatric. And basically he said he was going to die. No, you're not. You're not going to die. Let's fight this through. Right? I'll treat your psychiatric and basically let them treat the cancer. 10 years later, cancer's gone and he's alive. Another example, a guy with a movement disorder. Obviously, you don't want to deal with that. Had a aortic problem, an aneurysm. They gave up on him in this area. I said, it looks like I'm going to die. I went out of the way and I called my surgical residency program. It was at Baylor Methodist, one of the best, I think, in the country. They were good at this stuff. He went there and he lived. These are little examples that you can do. It is the people that are in the corner, in the dark, that you have to care for more than the ones that are well. A basic principle. The ones that smell. I have seen people who come into my place. You see them in the street and they're smelly and they don't have food. You bring them in and you bathe them and you treat them with conditions and they have a whole world inside. A whole human being whose life was taken away. That's what has to change. We have to emphasize more on listening, using your hands, less on technology. There's a good book, the French Differential Diagnosis. It's a book this thick, written back in the 1930s or 1800s, where it talks about disease and the history of disease. We have to learn more about the history of disease and rely less on technology. Depend on your instincts and your knowledge and your training and integrate them better. But the key is, if you're the healer and you give up on your patient, the patient is dead. Even when they're dying, I used to be with patients when I used to pronounce them dead. They would tell me, doctor, the biggest regret that these patients told me, I did not say, I love you. I did not say goodbye. And it's a very bad way to die. Being there for them, even to the last moment, means an impact. And I hope I have answered that. And hopefully
that was a beautiful answer. I loved it. All right, so I'm going to shift gears to the question I ask of all of my guests. What are you doing personally to age well?
I wake up at 5:30 in the morning. I am at the gym for an hour. I do cardio. I do weight training. And twice a week, I do cardiovascular. I do aerobics. I already have run many half marathons. I lost my nails on one of them. I never knew I could run, but I ran anyway. And I tried it. I did it. So I did maybe three half marathons I've done already. And after that, I don't have to prove anything to anybody anymore. I had to prove to myself I could do it. I eat in my house. I cook my own food. I increase protein. Protein intake is not enough, right? You need to eat more protein. Steak, chicken, fish. Cook with certain oils. Avocado oil, olive oil. Very powerful products, I think. I think that I've gotten rid of the sugar. The Starbucks, those Starbucks have, I'll tell you. I've learned about inflammation. I learned that certain foods inflame me. I've learned that I cannot eat bread. White bread seems to cause inflammation and weight gain. There are certain foods that you have to look at. And there are tests you can do for now what you're allergic to. But I think that proteins, fruits, it's the basic premise that we've been taught years. And I wish I had the luxury for sleep, which I don't have. But that would be the other item I would add to the equation. Very simple. And to know that if you can finish it today, wait till tomorrow. It wasn't meant for you to finish it today. We live this rat race. We live a life to reach a retirement, but in the process, you die. And I can give you many examples, my friend. We're always worried about, I need to have more, right? I got to get more, right? The problem is that we live beyond our means. So we're totally enslaved sometimes. Many people out there, they don't have the luxury. They grab what they eat. Bring your own food. Right? It's cheaper to buy the other food. And those are the lifestyle changes. And don't be afraid to fall in love. Love comes with pain. I think emotions are very healthy. I think that what you give to people, the act of giving, and I mean, it's a little bit, this is not scientific, but I think that there's something about giving and forgiving and being at peace with yourself, this internal side that helps a great deal.
All right, well said. Is there anything we missed in our conversation today?
I'm sure we did. A lot of details. I didn't want to bore your audience with all kinds of chemicals and all kinds of reactions. I would have put them to sleep. I was trying to put some some general concepts to hopefully, and for those of my colleagues, you're welcome to see my studies on LinkedIn because I spoke in very broad terms, and I didn't want to bore your. I did not want to bore your audience. But
I think you gave
thank you so much. You took me by surprise, inviting me for this. I promise you, as soon as this gets done, I will send you an article, and I'll send you if the other gets published, I will send you the article. Either way, you will find a lot of my work in LinkedIn.
Yeah, we'll provide links to that.
Huh?
And we'll provide links to that. And I'm really looking forward to the article getting published. Hopefully that doesn't take too long in the peer review process and gets out there. Let us know when it does. And, just keep doing what you're doing. I think you're doing some great work challenging kind of the status quo and how we treat some of these diseases, and just keep doing it and keep aging well.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. Hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.